MMA Now, powered by Film On TV Network.
I'm David Kano with MMA Now TV, and we're on location in Bel Air, California. Another very special guest, Mr. Darin Harvey. How you doing?
Doing well, David. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Got 2 for 1. Didn't expect you. We talked with Sam a little bit earlier, and just he's been in MMA. I mean, martial arts since he was growing up. What was your background in martial arts?
Actually, very similar. We have a similar Tang Soo Do roots. He took it a lot farther than I did. I trained with Ron Ponell and Mark Zacharatis at the same school that Chuck Norris. So I trained under the Chuck Norris system. Then I went up to prep school. I learned how to box. Then I started kickboxing with Mark Zacharatis. And then I went to the Muay Thai Academy in North Hollywood. And so I've had, a lot of training. So I've been very fortunate to train with some of the best in striking. And until 1993, when I saw the very first Gracie fight, that's when I became aware that I had some serious holes in my game. So.
And then you eventually did. You took jiu-jitsu and you're a brown belt.
Yeah, I got my brown belt under Marcus Venices, and at that time at our school we had like Oleg Tektarov, Mark Kerr, Bas Rutten, you name it. Every major MMA star at the time was training with us there. And they had the MMA classes, and then they were doing the jiu-jitsu. I was doing more the traditional jiu-jitsu, wanted to go through the belt system. So I got my brown belt in 2003, and I'm still a brown belt. So.
Yeah. Hey, and let's just talk about one of your clients that's one of the, or your former clients, one of the most famous people that you kind of brought up was Ronda Rousey before she was superstar Ronda Rousey.
Well, I saw that she was superstar when I met her, and she had something really unique and special about her. And then I had an opportunity to roll with her, and then I realized, wow, there's something really amazing going on here. So
Did you get armbarred?
I don't remember. I probably. I'm not easy to armbar, but I remember one time training with her, and she's amazing. She's just an amazing ground practitioner and amazing athlete.
And this is before she came into the UFC, when Strikeforce was still, was on Showtime, and she wasn't headlining. Did you think that women's MMA would be to where it would be now, where Amanda Nunes and Miesha Tate are headlining back when you had Ronda?
I knew it, and I invested in it, and I believed that if you can cross an athlete over, and I invested in Ronda, and we had full-time publicity trying to get her mainstream press, because I felt with her domination as a fighter, coupled with how she looks, coupled with getting some major articles, because there's a uniqueness, there's a dichotomy to a pretty girl that can kick some serious butt versus a guy. That's a given. And then all of a sudden they see this woman that could pretty much beat up a lot of guys. There was something there and unique, and we had something to work with. So we had a full-time PR team working on that. Photographers, we did photo shoots with Brian Bowen Smith, who's Cindy Crawford's photographer, and just really beautified her, got her very used to the camera early on, because I had anticipated that she'd be the first female in the UFC. So.
Well, I'll be honest with you. When I first saw women's MMA, I think it was Strikeforce, I wasn't a fan in the regards that I didn't think that women should be getting hit in the face, because it was gruesome. I mean, you think about it, but I slowly got desensitized, and now obviously it's not even a second thought. Was that your initial thoughts with women in MMA?
Well, you never like to see a woman get hit in the face, and in fact, the Miesha Tate fight really bothered me quite a bit, because that's the worst lacerations I've seen on a female. I've seen girls get hit, even when Ronda got knocked out by Holly. It wasn't this repeated punishment. It happened, it was kind of a flash thing. Yeah, she got hit with a few straight left hands, but she didn't get brutalized, in my opinion, the way Miesha did. So it was hard for me to watch, because I've been raised never raise a hand on a woman, and to see a bloody face, it's difficult. And she's such a sweet, lovely, beautiful girl, and I just hate to see that. I hate to see it happen to her.
Now, in your tenure with Ronda, what are some things that people may not know about her that may shock them?
I think it's pretty much everything is out about Ronda now. There's nothing. She's pretty much a public figure today. There's certain things I can't really discuss. But I mean, all I can say about Ronda, she's an incredible athlete, and I would love to see her come back someday, and avenge that loss against Holly.
Which might be a big major fight, even though Holly lost and Misha lost to Amanda.
Well, it's the one loss that Ronda's had, and my guess is once they look at the footage, she's going to do things a heck of a lot differently, and I don't necessarily think it will go the same way. Granted, Ronda doesn't do double or singles, which is how Misha ended up getting her at the end of the day, and Holly was brilliant. If you look at where she kept her arm, kept her hips lower than Ronda's, and made it very difficult for Ronda to throw her. But if they analyze, keep it in the center, don't chase a counter fighter, and some adjustments. And listen, you could sit and critique the whole camp, but Plan A had been working very well for a long time. So in fairness to these guys, there was no real Plan B. Because they just, even me, having watched Holly, I thought Ronda was pretty much, because she, I think in her 35 boxing matches, she only had 6 finishes. So I didn't look at her as a danger as far as hurting Ronda. And if you can't knock Ronda out, how the hell are you going to beat her? She's going to take you down like she's taking down everybody else. So,
right. Now your experience in MMA goes further than that. What are your roots of actually getting into MMA?
Well, I through training at Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu and being around all, Oleg and Pedro Rizzo and Marco Huas and Boss Rutan and all those guys, being a business guy and having had some kickboxing management experience and being a martial artist and a quasi kickboxer, I was very interested in it, and I became very close with Boss. So I started representing him for his 2 fights in the UFC. I helped negotiate those deals.
Now, the guys from those days, like a Pedro Rizzo, who was UFC heavyweight champion, and Boss Rutan, the champion as well, the heavyweight champion, what would they do now in today against a John Jones or a Stipe Miocic, Cain Velasquez?
Well, I think the sport's evolved quite a bit. And if you take those guys with modern training, because there's really no MMA, there was no Jackson, they kind of had to figure it out on the fly, which actually is a big hole. It's a whole other issue in our sport. There's not enough camps where you can get everything integrated, where coaches are communicating with each other. It's something that needs to be resolved if the sport's going to grow, in my opinion, because one coach doesn't talk to the other, and they're overtraining them, and they're making them do strength and conditioning twice, and maybe you need to work on your wrestling, and they're driving all over the place. So there's very few Greg Jackson type camps around. You have AKA, which is incredible, and the guys' American top team. I don't know if I'm digressing from that conversation, but you put those super athletes like a Boss Rutan, he'll beat anybody. Granted, wrestling was always, he was taken down like he was taken down by Randleman pretty easily, but I think that he would even work on that today. So I think there's no reason why a guy is athletic. I was with Boss the other day. He's 52, I think. I touched his back. He has spinal erectors. They feel like boa constrictors running down his back. He's just a genetic freak. And if you talk to anybody back in that time, he was so friggin' strong and explosive. And even his jiu-jitsu, he would just explode into moves and catch guys that were black belts, really easily. So I think he would do very, very well with a good camp and, and a good game plan. But yeah, guys like John Jones that's a whole other level.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Actually, Boss told me a story where he was sleeping, and then he thought of a move when he was sleeping. He woke up his wife, and he tried it on his wife when she was just in bed in the middle of the night.
100% true. He's that kind of guy, and he's one of the most intelligent people, most charismatic and loyal people I've ever known. He's just, in fact, we're going to Alaska in a couple of weeks. Boss and myself, it was kind of on his bucket trip of things to do. So I know
you guys are going to Alaska.
We're going to Alaska, yeah.
Anchorage.
We're going to fly into Anchorage, then we're going to take a plane to Kihei, and then we're going to stay at a place called Deep Creek Fishing Lodge, and then we take a helicopter in for fishing and so on. So it's going to be quite a trip.
You should bring a camera crew in there.
It's going to be funny because we're going to have a cast of characters. We have this whole lodge that this guy Krusty runs the lodge, and he's like, he brings in heads of state from Russia and politicians.
Let's talk about the UFC sale. First of all, what are your initial thoughts on the UFC sale? Did you foresee this coming? And second of all, what's the overall mood from the old school guys like Bass Rutten of it being sold for $4 billion.
Well, it's hard to put a value and to have that discussion unless you know what their earnings were, because you look at the EBITDA and there's calculations that people do to figure things out. My and I have not spoken with Boss about it. It sounds high to me based on what they said they generated in 2015, which was around 600 million. So that wasn't all profit, but who knows? It's not a publicly traded company, so you don't know what the real numbers are. I don't know what's gonna become of it. I've always believed that at some point this is going to become more like boxing, and the fighter's going to be the star, not the promotion. Right now, the UFC is these guys come and go, and Dana's charismatic self is always there, and he's the one constant.
Did you see this coming though?
Well, I'm friends with Sam Spira, and we've had those discussions. We've heard rumors, but not based on anything. I don't believe in rumors. I believe once the check has been wired into the account, that's when the deal's done. Obviously, the deal's done, or they wouldn't have announced it formally. So I heard about it. It was, I think it's going to be interesting. You have two very strong personalities like Ari Emanuel and Dana White, and I don't know how that's going to work out. The Fertittas had a long-standing relationship with Dana for since they were probably teenagers, so they know each other
right.
From that perspective. It's going to be very interesting to see how this whole thing plays out.
There was obviously big news of UFC Fight Week. John Jones testing positive. Allegedly, it's estrogen blockers. But there was a day, the Pride Days, where the fighters were encouraged to take steroids, where it said in the contract, we won't test you, so don't worry about it. And nowadays, it's becoming a lot more stringent. I mean, do you think that this is a game changer for fighters?
Well, I think it's been around since the beginning of the invention of performance-enhancing drugs. As long as somebody thought they could perform at a higher level, they want to do whatever they could take. The money, there's so much at stake, and then you're concerned that other people are doing it, and you're going to be at a disadvantage, and maybe they're better at hiding it than the other guy. I'm not saying everybody does it. A lot of people do. I'm sure a lot of people don't. I know Boss is vehemently opposed to any sort of drugs, and there's a lot of guys that are very much against it. He feels that it's a psychological crutch. So not only when you take that drug away do you not have the same level of testosterone and aggression in your system, but you have that question mark in your brain, am I going to be able to perform at the same level in a sport that's so mentally driven? Because there's so many guys that have lost fights just because their mindset wasn't correct. So I think that it...
Do you think John Jones knowingly took something?
It's really hard to say. I like to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, to be honest with you. There's all these things about cross-contamination in labs and so on and so forth. I'd like to believe that he knows, that he's smart enough to know that with the testing now that's going on, and they can do random drug tests at any time, and they're using these independent labs, that he would be smart enough to know that they're going to test him, and he's going to get busted. So I can't imagine anybody taking that risk, to be honest with you. But I'm just maybe a naive guy.
And as far as, even with the stringent testing, do you think that fighters will find a way to have masking agents of steroids? It seems to me that as long as testing's been around, there's always been a way around it, no matter how.
I'm sure, you're talking about millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and people want a part of that. They want to monetize themselves. And I think in the back of a lot of people's minds, it's not just cheating. They're concerned that everybody else is cheating, and they want to be in on it. And it's been going around for a long time. It was in cycling, and Lance Armstrong denied it for a very long time, and eventually got nailed and came clean with the whole thing. So, but he did it because everybody else was doing it, and if you want to be at the top of your game, it's not fair to have to compete. So I think it's very good that the UFC has implemented these very, very strict regulations, because it's going to hopefully keep the playing field even. Two guys not on steroids. I noticed a very distinct difference. The Pride guys in Japan, when they all came to UFC, Anderson and Vanderlei Silva, he just seemed like a different guy, And I don't know if it was the UFC jitters or there was something going on, And I don't know him, and I don't want to speak out of school, but I think a lot of those guys were doing drugs, and they just seemed like raging bulls. Their bodies looked different.
Well, I mean, the body difference is huge. But I tweeted out and went on air and said that not only when you get busted for PEDs like Anderson Silva or John Jones, do you get suspended? But I think that your legacy is even, there's some question marks. Like, where were you taking for your last fight, the fight before? Do you think it affects your legacy?
Well, I think it did with the baseball players. You know, it leaves a big question mark. All these guys that were, you know, home run kings and all this stuff.
Barry Bonds,
Yeah,
Mark McGuire.
exactly. So that I think it just, you know, it tarnishes somebody, and it's hard to make that go away because you always in the back of your mind, you know, this guy cheated. He was competing against another guy that wasn't doing this, or at least didn't get busted for it, and that, you know, it changes. It's cheating. It's against the rules, and you know, I'm a guy. I follow the rules. I pay my taxes. I take care of my son. I take care of his mom. I just assume everybody's going to know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm not smart enough to cheat. You know, so you know, when you're lying and you're cheating, there's only one truth. There's a lot of lies and there's a lot of bullshit. So
Now, you saw Ronda rise to the top, and you saw that the stardom coming. But as far as the UFC, or just not UFC, just MMA overall, coming to where it wasn't mainstream. It wasn't on TMZ. It wasn't even on ESPN's website.
well, we got it on TMZ. We made it do it to the full court press. My goal with Ronda was really to mainstream the sport because not because I love the UFC. I love the sport since I'm a martial artist. I was really sad when I heard it might go away, and you know, and I think the Fertittas did an incredible job. But my goal was to help brand the sport through branding a crossover athlete, which I think that we collectively, Geneva Wasserman, my partner, and myself did a pretty damn good job of that. Granted, we had something very special to work with, but you need a team. Yeah, you need a team. So I think that's what's driving guys like Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey. It's driving the $4 billion price tag for the UFC, and they're realizing that the sport is becoming more mainstream. It's not it's not just the 18 to 34 demographic anymore. It's broadened tremendously, which is going to broaden pay-per-view revenue and all the other sources of revenue.
So let me ask you, rounding out, is where do you see the UFC 1 year from now, 5 years, and 10 years down the road?
I'd be really curious to see how Dana and Ari are going to be able to work together. That's, you know, I'm not saying they won't be able to work together. I'm just really curious to see how that plays out, because they are both Ari pretty much runs Hollywood and Dana pretty much runs MMA. And there's no longer going to be the Fertittas there to neutralize stuff, and you know, and we don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
So a year is it going to be like a transition period between Ari and Dana?
I think so. I don't know what's going to happen. Is Joe Rogan still going to be on? Because he said if it ever sold, he wasn't going to be part of it. But maybe he was assuming Dana wouldn't be part of it anymore. Right. You know, so a lot of things, of course, things are going to be changing. I think in the long run, it's going to be better in terms of negotiations, because you could have a guy like Ari. They negotiate movie deals. Why can't you negotiate a fight deal too?
Right.
You know, based on the value and based on what, you know, they look at box office. So in here we look at pay-per-view and ticket sales and things of that nature, and you can quantify a value based on the athlete. So I think it might end up being a better thing all in all for fighters and for management, because right now there's management, we're pretty much impotent. You know, our balls have been snipped.
10 years down the road, obviously there's an imaginary crystal ball. Still cages, still mats, are the different weight divisions. What does MMA look like? Are there going to be multiple promotions? Is it just going to be the UFC?
I think at a point it's going to be a star-driven sport. Like, you could take, before Ronda lost, you could take a Cyborg and a Ronda Rousey and promote that fight. I could do it. I'm not a promoter. Put together a team, partner up with Showtime, and get 1 million pay-per-view buys, and give, you know, do it at $60 and let them split half of the pay-per-view.
Like a boxing model.
Like a boxing model. I think you could do that with stars at the end of the day. But the UFC is, you know, and I think that's going to change at a point. And I don't know if it's going to be this Muhammad Ali act, and some promoters going to say, hey, listen, I'll give you $25 million to fight. You know what I mean? And the UFC is not going to necessarily want to match that, and that could change things. That's where I've always believed. That's why I felt that it was a big risk for these guys to pay $4 million for a company when, at the end of the day, it's human-driven. You know, yes, it's brand. The UFC is big, but it's a man or a woman getting into that cage, and they're going to have a drawing power or they're not. And you're not going to necessarily need the UFC to promote it.
Last question before we get you out of here.
Yeah.
The one thing you're most proud of accomplishment, and I'm not just talking MMA, in your life, you're 53 years old,
Yeah.
and you can give advice to your younger you, and you say, I'm going to be most proud of this. What are you most proud of that you've accomplished?
I'm most proud that I'm a single father. I have a 12-year-old son, and I put him before everything else. I take good care of his mother. I make sure he has a good education. I make sure he has discipline. I make sure that I give him every opportunity to have positive self-esteem, and that doesn't come from giving them things, but it gives them from giving them opportunity. So I'm most proud of the father that I am. That's the most important thing I'll ever do in my life, is making sure that I have an emotionally well-adjusted, productive human being that I raise. And I think it's the most important thing that any parent will ever do in their life is raise a child.
And a follow-up on that, is there one piece of advice that you've given him, or say a young Darin Harvey at 10, 12 years old, what's one piece of advice you would give him?
Do what you love, find your passion, and if you do what you love, and I talk to him about this all the time because it applies to myself, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Darin Harvey, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you. Appreciate it.